Hello everyone, and welcome to Inside Leather History of Fireside Chat. I'm Doug O'Keefe. I am the producer and the host of the chats, which are a program of the Leather Archives and Museum. Today I'm in Palm Springs, California. I know you can't see, but there's fantastic, wonderful weather here today, and who doesn't want to have that? Anyway, it is February 8th and 2023, and my guest today is Drew Kramer, who is the current editor and the chief of Drummer Magazine. He's also the founder of the Palm Springs Bondage Club. How are you today, Drew?
I'm doing well. Thanks so much.
And thank you for coming here to do the interview with me today.
Absolutely, Douglas.
All right. So, Drew, please tell us a little bit about where you're from and your circumstances growing up.
I was born in Point Pleasant, Pennsylvania. I grew up in the house my father built. But it was also 90 miles south of New York City, 30 miles outside of Philadelphia. I was baptized and confirmed into the Episcopal Church, which meant a great deal to me. I got a pretty good education in local public schools and then went off to college in Reading, Pennsylvania. Then it was called Alvernia College. Went there in the 1980s. It was very much run by Bernardine Franciscan sisters.
Oh my gosh, okay.
A Polish order of nuns.
Why was being part of the Episcopal Church so important to you?
When I hit puberty, I became aware of the fact that I was sexually and romantically attracted to men. Back in the 1970s, the priest at our church retired after decades there, and we got a new priest. And he was gay, and he didn't, talk about that. He didn't, but he had a friend named Keith, I think, and he and Keith would take vacations to Italy together. There was one guy in the parish who was outraged by this, and he sent a letter to all the members of the parish. We have to meet about this, and so this meeting was held one Sunday, and everybody was there. Father Garrigan said nothing. He just sort of stood there. This guy went on and on about it's immoral, it's terrible, it's blah, blah, blah. And then we had a vote. Overwhelmingly, Father Garrigan was supported. And this is 1977, and it's a church.
How amazingly progressive for that period.
Yeah.
So that brings me to another question then, sort of in the same time frame for you. Please tell us a little bit about your early exploration. Clearly you had some concept of homosexuality because of the priest, but did you have any concept on leather, kink, or the larger community?
From the time I was a really little kid, watching cartoons and reading comic books, when there were themes or a narrative around bondage and domination, particularly like a powerful man rendered powerless by another man, I was at full attention. With puberty, that all became eroticized, right? That concerned me greatly because being gay didn't, but getting tied up and beaten and you are my slave now, where does that fit in? And that's something that I was ashamed of, that I wished would go away, and I didn't know how to deal with. When I was 16, I discovered there was a gay cruising site not too far from where I lived. And yay, that was awesome. Many wonderful memories. But occasionally, and it was basically just walking along a canal towpath in the middle of the night, exchanging blowjobs. But occasionally, partners that I met there would sort of whisper in my ear, so what do you like? What do you really like? And my answer was always, I want to be tied up. And on a couple of rare occasions, they would accommodate me, right?
Wow.
But I still had the sense that this was a secret thing. Okay, maybe there are some other people who share this same secret.
Yeah.
All that changed summer before I went away to college, where I came across this entire stack of Drummer magazine. You know, and I read all of them in a few hours, and now I had words to describe who I am, words to describe what I wanted, and most importantly, I became aware that, you know, as opposed to being the only one, there were listings in the back of clubs and bars, and when I could make my way out into the world, there was a brotherhood that was waiting for me.
So how did you find them when you did go out?
I was working in Philadelphia, and I found my way to the Bike Stop, the leather bar that is still in Philadelphia. The first couple of times I visited, I didn't quite understand how any of this was working, because, I mean, you, from street level on, I think it's Camac Street, you like walk in and it's a bar, and there's people standing around talking, drinking, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, what is this? This is just a bar. And then after, on visit number 3 or 4 or whatever, this guy came in, he walks into the bar, he waves to the bartender, and he goes to the back of the bar. And I assumed he went to the bathroom, but he never came out again.
Okay.
And I go back there sort of exploring, and there's this door. It's not marked or anything, and you open up the door, and there's like a set of wooden stairs going down. That's part of the bike stop that was known as the pit stop.
Okay.
This basement that was packed and filled with smoke and dark, and that was paradise. That was,
wow.
Here it is. Here is
Wow.
everything that I ever wanted, you know, that I ever hoped would be out there waiting for me. Here it is in the basement of the bike stop.
Was there anything shocking, surprising, intriguing?
No, because, you know, at the same time, like, it was all about the sex. Like, I mean, that's what we were all there for. It was gay, male, sexual space. About the size of this, you know, crowded with men who also wanted sex. Yeah, every time I went to the bike stop, it was an adventure. You never knew what you were going to get. You know, you connected with a guy in the bar. Was he going to put handcuffs on you and fuck you? Maybe. Was he going to beg you to piss in his mouth? Maybe. Was he going to put on a leather hood, get down on his knees, you know, put his hands behind your back and, you know, suck your cock as he's calling you master? All those things happened to me, you know, with men I went home with from the bike stop. For 2 men, when there's a connection, the possibilities are endless.
True.
You know, and back then, it was just sort of like, this is what turns me on. Does that work for you? Oh, okay, I'll try that, you know.
Fascinating.
It was, you know,
wow.
I'm really into this guy. What can I do to get him off? And he's basically thinking along the same lines, you know.
Wow. Very different from what we know today.
Yeah.
But when we were preparing for this chat, you mentioned 3 aspects of leather. For the audience, what are they?
Oh, this is like my own creation, my own idea. First aspect of leather, I think, is tradition. You know, just sort of like an awareness of like, there is a whole line of men who have done the same thing and met challenges and overcame those challenges, and, you know, we are their heirs.
Yes,
you know, in many
respects.
The second is fellowship, you know, because, okay, you're a piss pig. Oh my God, you love getting pissed on. You love pissing on guys. You're a piss pig. Among other men who are into piss, you come to feel a sense of brotherhood and connection. Take your seat on an airplane and a guy comes down the aisle and he has a yellow handkerchief chip in his back pocket. Even though you might be completely different backgrounds and, social classes, you're going to talk the entire flight. So tradition, fraternity, and finally exploration. When there is a connection there are no limits on where two men might go. And no matter how many decades you've been at this, no matter what kind of things you've gotten up to, all of us are virgins at something.
True.
70, 80-year-old men are virgins at something. And because of the dynamic and the ethos of Leathermen, they haven't walled themselves off from those possibilities. I know a guy who, in middle age, met a guy and fell in love, and the man he fell in love with is a fisting top. Well into his 50s, he's discovered this amazing new thing, which has quickly become like the most important thing in his life.
How wonderful.
Yeah, and he's a total ass pig.
I can't help but ask how you apply each of those in your own life.
I have a few photographs that have been taken of me, in whipping scenes, and I don't quite recognize myself because of the expression on my face and how I'm standing. And
fascinating.
Yeah, and it's nobody, people closest to me don't know that person is in there, but some people, my partners, they know that, because I've shown that to them. And
right.
Showing that to them, that makes you incredibly vulnerable. There's this shared mutual vulnerability that we have that fosters fraternity and brotherhood. When you're having these intimate encounters, you sort of it expands that care for the well-being of others outwards.
Yeah.
Even though you might not know their names, even though they might be very different from you are, in every respect, there's a basic level of caring that just keeps expanding outwards. And for me, the limits of that would be leather. I feel connection with other Leathermen that, I don't necessarily feel with all gay men in the world,
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the third piece. The first one I mentioned, tradition.
But you came into the leather and the kink scene at a very tumultuous and a terrifying time in the early 80s. What was happening then? What was going on?
Those men that I was meeting at the bike stop, and later, after a couple years later, when I moved to New York City, at Alter and the Eagle and the Spike, at home was their lover who was bedbound, and they managed to get somebody to sit by his bedside, and or they had just that afternoon come from a celebration of life, for a 28-year-old friend of theirs, because it was the AIDS crisis.
There we go.
It was the middle of the AIDS crisis, and gay men, were dying first by the hundreds, then by the thousands, and AIDS was a fatal illness. If you were HIV positive, that meant you were going to die.
Yeah.
It was just a matter of when. And there you were living with that knowledge. And of course, there was this monthly or bi-monthly ritual where you would go to the place and they would draw your blood and you would sit and wait, and then you would get the results of your HIV test.
Right.
There I am, 25 years old, every month confronted with the real possibility of my imminent mortality.
Yeah.
All that fucks with your head a lot,
Absolutely.
It was, and even the experience of having sex. And it was gay men, it was not the CDC or anybody else who came up with the formula of, safer sex, wear a condom, right?
Yes.
It was a while before that caught on, and even after everybody heard about it, You know, there's your brain and there's your dick. And
yeah, for some people it's not separate.
yeah, and an experience I absolutely never had was, oh my God, you're so hot. Oh my God, you're so hot. Let's get it on. Wait, do you have a condom? No, I don't. Oh, do you have a condom? No, I don't. Oh, well, I guess we'll have to play gin rummy? No, you know.
Yeah.
We had sex everywhere anyway, you know, through this trick of dissociation or whatever. Talk about bonding, having sex in those circumstances where, you know, literally it's like, I love you more than I fear death.
Yes, I can see that.
Yeah.
But then that brings us to when you were in Philadelphia, though. You joined the first meeting of ACT UP in Philadelphia. Now, people of my generation and our generation are familiar with ACT UP, but there are a lot of people out there today who don't know about that. Would you please explain to the audience what was ACT UP?
Sure. Larry Kramer, no relation, was a playwright who lived in New York City, and the Gay and Lesbian Community Center there used to have, I think it was a Tuesday night lecture series. And whoever was scheduled couldn't make it, so somebody gave Larry Kramer a call. And ACT UP strategize what could we do to make those people do what we want them to do, right? Their first big action, they shut down the New York City Stock Exchange, and they floated a big banner saying "Sell Bros," because Bros Welcome was the manufacturer of AZT, the only drug available for people living with AIDS, and they were charging a ridiculous, exorbitant price to it.
Yeah.
And ACT UP had demanded that they lower the price, and Bros Welcome was like, "Who the fuck are you?" And then ACT UP interrupted trading on the New York City Stock Exchange, and the next day, Bros Welcome cut the price of AZT by 75%.
My gosh, yeah.
Action is the antidote to fear.
Okay.
And
Yes.
for me, that's what ACT UP was. It was a way of taking action. And that's why, you know, as you said, I saw a flyer wheat pasted on a lamppost in Philadelphia, and I went to the first the first meeting of ACT UP Philadelphia. A year and a half later, I moved to New York, and I became involved in ACT UP New York.
Depict ACT UP a little more also, because I know, especially a lot of young people are not going to be familiar with ACT UP. It covered a lot of different elements of the community and a lot of different levels as well. You mentioned you were arrested for civil disobedience.
Mm-hmm.
For example, what did you do for that?
Well, which arrest are you
Choose the
referring
one
to?
you like best, you know?
I mean, one time I was arrested when Mayor Rudolph Giuliani was the mayor of New York City. What he was proposing to do was basically eliminate the social services arm of the city government that dealt with people with AIDS.
Oh, yeah.
Then it was
Yeah.
called the Division of AIDS Services.
Right.
And it was this long campaign that I and others was involved in to prevent him from doing that. We were successful. Today, it's been renamed. It's now HASA, which is HIV AIDS Services Administration.
Okay.
But it's still there, you know?
A piece here that I feel is particularly important, especially for younger audiences who are going to be seeing this, is that you were a buddy for men who were living with AIDS. And I would like for you to explain what that meant, but also, there's a second piece to this. Other people I've interviewed have talked about some of the psychological trauma that came from that and PTSD that they experienced as a result of doing that. The actual care of these people and why that was not only profound and important, but how it affected you.
Yeah. Well, I living in Philadelphia, I signed up as a volunteer with ActionAid of Philadelphia, thinking that I'd be licking envelopes or, something like that, working information tables at street fairs. And they said, no, let's get you in the buddy program. And so after training, I was assigned as a buddy to, it turned out to be 3 men in all that I worked with, who were living with AIDS. My first buddy was bedbound, and so, I would be like doing shopping for him and a lot of other things cooking meals that he couldn't do for himself, cleaning his house. And at one point, I was working as a paralegal, and I show up and he was in distress. He was in a great deal of distress, and I was like, oh, holy fuck, we got to get you to the hospital, Kareem. So and he was incredibly frail. He was skin and bones. He weighed less than 100 pounds. So I literally carried him out and, propped him against a light post and hailed a cab. And I took him to Temple University Hospital in North Philadelphia, and, get him out of the cab, and, his eyes are rolling back in his head, and we show up in the emergency room, and they quickly looked me over, and they said, oh, hey, the doctor who treats people with AIDS isn't on duty right now, so you're going to have to go to Episcopal Hospital, which was the charity hospital, a couple miles away. And I said, no, that's not what's going to happen. I work for Montgomery, McCracken, Walker and Rhodes, the largest law firm in Philadelphia. And if you don't admit this person right now, there's going to be holy hell for you to pay. And I got Kareem admitted.
Wow.
So it was caring and advocacy, for people who were living with AIDS.
But other people who've done that have told me that they still suffer PTSD from some of the work they did. Have you been affected?
Not specifically from that, and I think that the PTSD, my first boyfriend, this wonderful guy who was a painter and visual artist, a couple months into our relationship, he was the first guy that ever said, I love you, and he said, I love you, right? So we go to get tested for HIV, and I was negative and he was positive. And a few weeks later, he left a letter that he stuck to the mail slot. And he was 10 years older than I was. He was 33, I was 23. And he said, here's what's happening. I don't want you to be the person to clean up my shit and my vomit. And I don't want you at 23 years of age to be a widow. And so I made arrangements. I'm going to live with my brother in Arizona, and I love you and have a great life, right? Later, after I moved to New York City, I ran into somebody who had known both of us, and his first words were, "Oh, I'm so sorry about Terry."
Yeah.
Things like that. I think gay men, my generation, gay men who were sexually active between, 1981 and 1986, Oh my God, we have this teeny tiny, this thin patina of holding it all together and blah, blah, blah. But if you just like scratch that with your fingernail.
Falls apart.
Oh, yeah. Next year in 2024, I turned 60 years of age. I have nothing saved for retirement because I spent my 20s and 30s pretty sure that I wouldn't see my 40th birthday, little less turning 60. And I still can't quite believe, even though it's, I don't know, less than 2 years away, I still can't quite believe that I'm going to be 60 years old.
When you were working with ACT UP, you had a chant that you used when you were marching, and it was about President George Bush Sr. I'd love to hear it.
Oh, it was one of my favorites, but it was history will recall George Bush did nothing at all.
Mm-hmm. What was that in reference? What did he do that was so egregious?
Well, it was what he didn't do. Like Ronald Reagan before him.
They didn't care.
Yeah, he did nothing. And there was, in the 1992 presidential campaign, one of the debates, and ACT UP had this whole campaign called AIDS Campaign 92, specifically to make AIDS an issue in the 1992 presidential campaign.
Right.
And we would harass all the candidates, Republicans and Democrats, through the primaries, up through after they received a nomination, getting them to talk about AIDS. And Bill Clinton eventually, got so tired of it, and after a couple of really successful zaps of Clinton's campaign, he basically approached ACT UP and GMHC and AIDS policy people and said, what do I have to do for you people to stop doing this? And we presented him with a list of demands, But anyway, in the 1992 presidential debate, because ACT UP had figured out who the moderator was and did a fact zap, asked questions about AIDS, there was a question about AIDS. And the response first went to George Bush. And he said, well, we're very concerned about this, and, definitely we're doing all we can, but we don't get credit,
right.
Blah, 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 blah.
He couldn't have cared less.
Yeah, and then the microphone went to Bill Clinton, and Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton said, well, Mr. President, that is the first time since you've been president that you have said the word AIDS in public. If I am elected, I will fully fund the Ryan-Watt CARE Act. I will erase the HIV immigration ban. And he went through the list of demands that ACT UP had presented him with, right? Making that the official policy of his campaign. Alas, as president, he disappointed us on many fronts.
That's the nature of a politician.
Yeah. But, also, really importantly, AIDS activists basically were invited in to the FDA to present their critiques of clinical trials. And
I recall that.
Clinical trials today are very different from what they were before that because of the intervention of ACT UP.
They were much more expedited. Isn't that right?
No, it was, yes. Yeah, it used to be, and AIDS was 100% fatal illness, right?
Yeah.
It was this cumbersome process that rolled out over years and years and years.
That's right.
It had to be, controlled, and it had to be clean. For example, here's the thing. Because of hormonal changes, women's bodies are more complicated than men's. So it used to be that women were excluded from clinical trials.
I see.
even though women's bodies are different and drugs interact
Differently.
in women's bodies than they do in men's bodies. How is this drug going to work for women? We don't know. But anyway, and I mean, one of the innovations of ACT UP that was demanding women take part in clinical trials was one. Another one was, if in a clinical trial you have a drug that is showing promise, and if it shows promise about something that is killing people at that early stage, let's get drugs into bodies.
Right.
You know,
right.
let's get that to people who need it on the off chance that it might save their lives,
Yes.
even though the data isn't
It's not all
precise
there yet,
and
not all
perfect
clear.
and
Right.
complete and
Right.
peer reviewed. You know, let's move things forward.
When we were preparing for this, we were talking about various topics that are even affecting the modern community regarding HIV and AIDS and things like this, because it's still there, but bug chasing, which is seeing a big resurgence in the community. It's seeing popularity all over again. First of all, would you tell the audience what bug chasing is?
What it is someone who is HIV negative, who purposefully goes out seeking sex, seeking to get fucked by men who are HIV positive.
In order to contract the
exactly.
HIV. Yes.
With the goal being seroconversion.
Right.
And when, I don't know, it became more generally known that this was happening, the reaction from the gay press, from public health was, alarm and outrage and, how
Yes.
dare you, how very fucking dare you, and this is terrible, and this is mentally ill, and and it struck me at the time that like a lot of that was things that not leather gays have always said about BDSM. It's self-destructive, it's depraved, you're mentally ill, you're sick in the head, and after I kind of made that connection, I started to think more deeply about it because, bug chasing and its corollary, gift giving,
Yes.
arose after 1997, and which was a benchmark year because in 1997 there was developed an effective treatment for HIV.
Right.
And a dear friend of mine was in the hospital dying. His doctor had told him, like, nothing more we can do for you. And then a couple of days later, his doctor came in and said, so there's this idea that giving 3 drugs in combination might do something. And 2 weeks later, George walked out of the hospital and he's with us today.